a newer question on the registration, and it's whether or not you currently supervise any employees. So today, I just thought it would be nice to let you know what those findings are. 55% of our participants today do supervise employees currently, and 45% do not. And while today's topic is primarily going to be targeted to supervisory approaches, and so to supervisors, those who might be stepping into that role in the future will find this beneficial, and anyone who may be interested in accepting or pursuing a stretch assignment will also find this topic interesting. It's also will help you identify what makes a good stretch assignment so that you can be prepared to have a successful experience. All right, and I also, because we have a number of you who are non-supervisors, I've also added a piece to the end of this that I will address called 4 ways to execute a stretch assignment, or 4 tips to execute a stretch assignment. Okay, before we talk about stretch assignments, I assume many of you have heard the term before, and it falls flatly into employee development, or an employee development activity. And there's a lot of data showing that employee development is extremely important to any organization. So development opportunities consistently rank in the top 10 reasons that employees are attracted to an organization. It also plays a major role in why they stay. Conversely, it is also one of the leading reasons why workers leave an organization. And in some research, it's in the top 5, and in a few pieces of research, it's even the number 1 reason why people leave to pursue a different organization is for the growth opportunity. So that's a good reason to for this information today. And before we get into the specifics of stretch assignments, I'd like to talk a little bit about the rationale behind employee development and how it relates to strong organizational performance. So when leaders invest the time and energy into developing their employees, the effort is acutely acknowledged and even reciprocated by employees. So there are numerous studies that reveal that when attention is put there, that employees are not only more motivated, but that productivity increases as well. So there's something in the literature called discretionary effort, and I'm going to introduce another term as well called perceived investment in employee development, or PIED. I call it PIED. So most employees are going to perform adequately in their jobs. However, each employee always has a reserve of discretionary effort, and this is typically meted out proportionately to their perception of how a supervisor or an organization values them. You might look at it as a performance gift of gratitude. So organizational psychologists call this the perceived investment in employee development. I call it PIED, P-I-E-D. And it's not just a source of increased motivation, it's strongly related to a number of other factors as well. We'll go quickly through some of those. So there's commitment, job commitment, that is, intrinsic job motivation, organizational citizenship behavior. What that is helping behaviors that support the functioning of the organization, such as a willingness to step in, a willingness to help out colleagues, and even in situations where the employee might not be an expert in that piece of knowledge or that skill, they're willing to roll up their sleeves and help out wherever they can. A great example of this is I came from a small town in New England that had a small foundry that ended up burning down, and the investment that the owner had in that foundry was so great that in order to rebuild, it was going to be extremely costly. And he asked all of the employees to stay on and become demolition, cleanup, and restoration experts. And these employees were so invested and so felt so valued by that gesture that they not only pursued helping that company come back up to speed, but actually received certifications that were required by codes and various other requirements that that the state had for them. And the foundry company ended up spinning off a side business for all of the skills that had been developed by their employees while they rebuilt the company. So that's a tremendous kind of a outlier example of how this organizational citizenship behavior works. But I thought that was just a neat one that I witnessed. Quality of work life. Quality of work life is also related to development and employees' sense of belonging as they develop and find a place for them in the organization. And then, of course, we already mentioned employee retention, and this means this translates to reduced costs that are so associated with selection as well as training. There are various numerical figures bouncing around out there of the cost of replacing an employee, and it's astronomically high. It's surprising just how much it costs to replace an employee when you have high turnover. So development is a big thing. So what do we mean by development opportunities? I'm sure most of you are aware of all kinds of development opportunities. There are some obvious ones that come to mind. There are formal courses and conferences. Some of you pursue certifications and credentials that are supported by your agency. There are internal academies and in-service training programs that are often offered by your organizations and agencies. And there might also be some individual activities. Those might include coaching, mentoring, cross-training, job shadowing. Those are all activities that would be development opportunities. But often overlooked is this concept that we call a stretch assignment. And sometimes that term is also misused or rather mislabeled for a particular activity. So we're going to go through some of what makes a stretch assignment a stretch assignment. So first of all, let's take a look at this little chart here, where it's often we can find ourselves bored, and most of our jobs hopefully are spent somewhere in the comfort zone where we've gained a certain level of proficiency, we perform our jobs well, and we're fairly comfortable with that. And then occasionally we're offered an opportunity to stretch just a little bit beyond. Now, stretch assignments are not your usual training and development program. Stretch assignments are projects or tasks given to employees which are beyond their current knowledge. So it might be beyond their current knowledge or beyond their skill level. So they might be familiar with certain things but don't have the experience applying those skills. And so either one of those could be under stretch assignments. And a stretch assignment challenges employees by placing them into, let's face it, an uncomfortable situation in order to learn and grow. They are developmental, and that means that they're separate from the employee's routine objectives, which their performance is measured by. So it's separate from their usual job and their performance evaluation. Occasionally, new performance expectations and goal targets get mislabeled as stretch assignments because the new measures are particularly challenging, just because something is challenging doesn't mean it is a stretch assignment. It might just be a challenging performance objective. Okay, let's see. Also, this is an important point here. Because stretch assignments are developmental, the employee has the option to decline the opportunity. So a true stretch assignment is completely optional. And if the employee chooses not to stretch, then that is kind of a missed opportunity to grow or expand, or perhaps the employee senses that it's not the right time, stress levels are too high, demands are too high. There are a litany of reasons why an employee may not want to pursue a stretch assignment. So they do offer direct benefit to the agency. So they are very desirable, and not only for the employee to develop themselves, but they're desirable for an agency to extend stretch assignments because the agency gets something from that as well. Now contrast that to, say, a training course or a conference. That's very indirect because the knowledge that's gleaned there is not inherently a work product, where a stretch assignment is a work product. So over the last few years, stretch assignments have been on the rise because they are great opportunities to test creativity, innovation, judgment, and drive. And these are all emerging competencies that are needed by almost any organization to survive and thrive in the quick changing world that we're a part of now. Stretch assignments used to be reserved for those who were on track for an executive level position, and they have been used for quite a long time in doing that. So there is some research behind stretch assignments in this kind of realm. So there are some business researchers, the global executive search firm called Egon Zehnder, and they asked 823 international executives to look back at their careers and identify what helped them unleash their potential. And they had all kinds of lists of development activities, some of which we just ran through. And at the very top of that was stretch assignments. 71% indicate 71% of those 823 executives indicated that stretch assignments is what did it for them in terms of propelling their career. Also, the research firm Korn Ferry Management Consultants, they identified stretch or rotational assignments as, you guessed it, the most valuable leadership skill building experience, bar none. So this comes in ahead of other tactics that you may have heard of: action learning, mentoring, relationships, 360-degree assessments, exposure to more senior leaders, and formal classroom training. Above all of those, stretch assignments is number one. So stretch assignments have been shown to particularly be effective with employees who are seasoned in a discipline. So this isn't something that you extend to a brand new employee. These are employees who've moved beyond basic training, but they might be lacking a breadth of experience or a depth of knowledge, and that's what you're targeting those two. Okay, so we're going to get into some examples of stretch assignments and what they might look like, or how you can identify something that might be fashioned into a good stretch assignment. So devising the right strategy to gain experience and build skills can be done using a variety of assignments. And this is not an exhaustive list. These are just a few thrown out there, but it might get your wheels turning in terms of what you might have at your agency or in your work unit that might lend itself to a great stretch assignment for an employee that needs an extended challenge. So let's talk about some of those. Agency projects, agency strategic planning process. This includes including folks in the strategic planning process who might ordinarily be left out of that process, but by seeing it and watching it and participating in it, it may help them come up to gain new knowledge, skills, and experience to help the organization in the future. Turning around a failing operation, leading an important event or a meeting, maybe a high-profile initiative, a customer needs analysis. Maybe you need to craft some new policies or tinker with an existing policy. That's a stretch assignment as well. Interdisciplinary work groups, those are particularly challenging because you're reaching across maybe not only work disciplines, but agency, working across agency groups. Improving a process, solving a problem, evaluations, and by evaluations, it might be to really take a deep dive into a program or a project to really evaluate how that project or program is doing and what kinds of things might be available for improvements. That enables an individual to go really deep into some knowledge that they may not have been aware of before. How about addressing a conflict, or maybe joining a team that is dealing with a conflict, and relaunching a service or a product that may have failed previously? Okay, so there are some advantages as well as some cautions for stretch assignments. The advantages, we're just going to touch on just a few of those here that I wanted to highlight. They do encourage creative thinking and exploratory learning. You uncover new ways as a stretch assignee. You uncover new ways to improve processes and develop products and services. It can really increase confidence and engagement, not only in the work, but in what the agency is doing and the mission of the agency. And it certainly expands organizational capabilities, because now you have, after stretch assignments, you typically have more bench depth in your agency or your work unit. There are some cautions, some things that you need to watch out for. Typically, stretch assignments are prone to being overzealous or trying to reach for impossible targets, and that can lead to disappointment as well as damage. And then there may be some losses to your work unit in terms of misspent time and effort if a project doesn't quite go as planned. And just because a project fails doesn't mean that the learning experience has failed either. Typically, when a person puts forth their best effort, what they will find is that the product is good, but it might just not fit, or it might not be the right political timing for that effort to have reached its full fruition. So there are possible failures, and those can lead to costly impacts to the individual and the organization. So there's always risk involved, whereas if you're going to a workshop or conference, it's pretty low risk, right? Your big risk is whether or not you walk away with actionable information or not. But with this, you're actually engaging in something that is a live issue, and so it brings up, it ratchets up the anxiety level a little bit more. Also, this is something important to talk about, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later as well. It's Stretch assignments are susceptible to reinforcing biases. Management or even colleagues may identify high potentials based on stereotypes or based on affinities towards certain cultural types that are common either in your organization or in your society at large, in your greater community. So these predispositions or biases often cut out talented employees who don't fit a certain mold. And these biases often play out without a supervisor even being aware that they are acting on them. And so many of these biases are so ingrained in our organizations or in our culture that they've been accepted as rational or justifiable in our institutions. So this is where we get into unconscious bias or implicit bias, you may have heard it called. And we'll talk a little bit more specifically later about some things that we can do, some actions we can do to minimize that. There's also some research, and I'm not going to go into that a great deal today, but I have provided you a link in the PowerPoint slides, which will be coming to you in a later email, that might be of interest to you. There's some research and cautionary tales on the subject of stretch assignments, and researchers Joe Miller and Selena Rezvani conducted a specific study about stretch assignments and some of the approaches that employees take to them, and how this differs. Specifically, their work talks about gender. And the report is called Out of the Comfort Zone, How Women and Men Size Up Stretch Assignments and Why Leaders Should Care. The research reveals some gender and cultural differences that should be considered before identifying stretch candidates. And like I said, I've attached that link. And a little later, we're going to address, as I said, a few actions and safeguards that supervisors and managers can use to prevent some of the barriers that these assignments could pose. And I just can't caution enough that I have mentioned stretch assignments to some individuals, and they bristle because of previous experiences of favoritism and so on, or their perception of that as well. So on one hand, stretch assignments can be used to push forward one employee's privilege and favoritism while neglecting other high performers. But on the other hand, an assignment can be used to harm an employee who's presented with unmitigated exposure or just set up to fail. And oftentimes those are called dump assignments. You know, it's like, oh, well, we have this challenge over here and we know it's going to fail. Let's give it to so-and-so and see what they can do with it. Now, that person may be able to salvage it, but you really need, as a supervisor, you need to take a good hard look of what is your purpose in extending this challenge, and is it really a fair challenge? Does it have a fair opportunity of succeeding? Okay, when to use a stretch assignment. Let's explore this a little bit. Stretch assignments are for high potential and high performing employees. So these introduce, as we said before, either new skills or new experiences that extend beyond their current proficiencies. They're not used to bring an employee up to speed or to test whether or not they're going to keep their job or something. That's not what a stretch assignment is for. It's developmental. So the most beneficial stretch assignments are those that are intentional. They're selected to develop specific competencies that fit into a carefully crafted career development plan. Stretch assignments are acknowledged, and our acknowledgement of an employee's value to the organization and provide a rich context for the employee to grow. So common reasons to use a stretch assignment might be to quickly develop and test new ideas and programs, to retune approaches and techniques that might be tired and old or not producing the same efficiency that they once did. Another reason is to ensure the organization has adequate resources to respond to new skill demands. All of the time, new things are happening and we have to adjust to that. Stretch assignments are one way to do that. You can also use stretch assignments to vet whether or not an employee has the potential for what the organization or you as a supervisor see or anticipate that that employee has. They can enhance the organization's ability to adopt and use advances in technology. They can raise the bar by building efficient, effective, and highly motivated self-managed leaders, and prepare individuals to step up immediately if an absence or vacancy occurs in your organization. So some organizations approach this with something called a two-deep or backup model, where a less experienced or knowledgeable or less knowledgeable employee is stretched to perform parallel activities to a person who might be proficient at it. And that there are some redundancies in that, but it increases the bench depth as well as the expansion capability once the learner gains the proficiency. Usually this is done, this is a consideration for assignments where you cannot afford a lapse in quality or quantity while an employee comes up to speed. And so you're putting that highly capable individual in there, but they may not have all of the knowledge or all of the experience to make the best decisions quite yet. And and a lot of those critical moments are being held together by a person who does have all those skills already. So that's a way to what I might call dovetail those experience levels. Stretch assignments can be used for vertical or horizontal growth. So let's compare and contrast some of these and take a look at this. I want to state that they are not mutually exclusive. You might have an assignment that stretches both ways, but you should be cognizant of the dimensions of growth that you're after, because they are a little different. If you're looking to do a vertical stretch, you're looking for greater impact. And a horizontal stretch is you're looking for different responsibilities. So the vertical is concerned with the depth of knowledge and skill. The horizontal is more concerned with the breadth of experience. Vertical, you're looking at new knowledge and skill, and horizontal, new experiences. So vertical should align with the current needs that you have within your work unit or agency, and horizontal would be more concerned with the future needs. You may not have gotten there quite yet. A vertical stretch is usually used to grow specialists and leaders, and horizontal is used to grow generalists and individual contributors. And vertical is focused and influential. So the assignments are usually very highly visible and they're very focused. And for a horizontal growth, the assignments tend to be very diverse and complex. So those are some of the features that happen there. Okay, well, to stretch or not to stretch, that is the question. And commitment is certainly required. Working with employees on stretch goals requires a lot of commitment. So as a supervisor, if you're considering a stretch assignment, extending a stretch assignment, I have a few questions. I have 5 questions for you to think about before you just willy-nilly extend a stretch assignment. The first one is probably the most important. do you have time for closer supervision? Stretch assignments aren't dump assignments. They typically require extra supervision effort, and that is different than performance improvement. Oftentimes with performance improvement, you're having to provide closer supervision so that you can bring the employee's skills up. Opposite to that, oftentimes in a stretch assignment, you're having to meet with the assignee to catch up to them and what they're learning and what they're finding out, because that may inform organizational strategy. Typically, you'll have them in a highly visible or highly detailed role that as a supervisor, you'll want to keep up with what is happening in terms of the learning. Next, is the assignment free from predetermined actions that have to be followed in order to reach the outcome? Parameters are very important and they are needed, but when there is a predetermined prescriptive method, a sequence or procedure, this is how it is going to be done, then that's the realm of training and practice. Stretch assignments allow experimentation with new ways of doing things, so you're less concerned about, oh, it has to be done this way or with this procedure in a stretch assignment. Third, do the assignment goals link to organizational strategy? Good stretch goals are part of a larger, more ambitious effort so that whatever is achieved is learned, and learned is part of a larger, more ambitious effort that that may be attached to your work unit or your entire agency in terms of organizational strategy. And the development goals should be inextricably tied to organizational strategy, because you're not just building an employee, you're building an employee that has value to the organization. So the things that you're trying to build should be tied in with that strategy. Fourth, is the assignment transformational rather than transactional? Stretch assignments are transformational, not simply transactional. So transactional would include objectives that are more along the lines of performance standards. Stretch goals should force innovation, collaboration, learning, and they're not just about doing the same thing faster or with greater effort, not just a matter of working harder for a short period of time. It's transformational assignment. And the fifth question I have for you is, if you have an extremely ambitious stretch assignment, can it be deconstructed into several short-term stretch goals and include multiple cycles? Perhaps in some extreme examples, a stretch assignment might need to be broken up into a couple stretch assignments, and it may not be with the same person depending on what that assignment is. But if you can create smaller stretch goals along the macro stretch assignment, then you create opportunities for a series of wins that build momentum, and this may help the employee also push past setbacks or failures in subsequent efforts. If you create small battles in the Great War of trying to accomplish something, then you have a greater opportunity for that confidence to build. Okay. Now, I also have some questions for employees as they're looking at a stretch assignment. And this is for an employee to ask themselves, perhaps, but in this case, I've worded these questions really for the supervisor to be asking themselves about the employee. Okay, and that might need a little bit of employee input as well. So do the employee's needs match the organizational needs? It's critical that stretch assignments be carefully designed. Top performers can experience a high level of stress during the assignment and feel pressured to take excessive risks and feel that success is either impossible or unattainable, frankly. And they may feel just pressured into, I've got to accept this assignment or it's going to ruin my career. And some of that anxiety may have to be reduced or alleviated. Before inviting an employee to accept a stretch assignment, consider some of these questions here, and that this will be important here. So, will the competencies developed have a place in the agency's future? This is, again, tying back to the concept I talked about just before, that it should be tied into the organization's strategy and looking at future development. Third, what mastery does the organization require to advance an individual? You don't necessarily want to send an employee out chasing after things that are not going to benefit them or the agency. Fourth, what mindset shift is required for success? So there might be a particular mindset that's required for the employee to be successful, and they have to wrap their head around that. And that has to be really clearly articulated and figured out by the supervisor before extending the assignment, so that that employee can be guided and mentored into that mindset shift. And then this goes without saying, what is the employee's workload? Are there tasks that can be either postponed or redistributed to another employee while they take on these new assignments? Or is the employee's workload such that there is room already for a stretch assignment to enter in there? So now let's talk about how to structure a stretch assignment for probable success. There are, of course, every stretch assignment has a beginning and an end that are clearly defined. And so we're going to break this down into 3 parts: things that you can do before, and then things that you can do during, and actions that you can take after the fact. Okay, so structuring for success before: provide clear start and end dates. Define the scope of the assignment. What is and what is not included in this assignment? If it's an ambiguous or complex and challenging assignment, we all know that it has a way of consuming everything in its path. So certainly unexpected issues and new needs might emerge, but these have to be slated for future projects, or at least they have to be negotiated, and the question has to be asked if they fit within the scope. And it's just as important to define what is not in the scope as what is in the scope. Otherwise, you end up with a phenomenon that we call scope creep, and everything and anything falls under the project, and the employee becomes overwhelmed. Complete an individual development plan. Now, this is should be part of your performance appraisal process, to have a development plan in there. It is separate from performance objectives, but is usually attached there, and it conveniently is great to talk about development goals when you're having performance conversations. Because on-the-job learning is significantly different from other developmental processes like formal training, it's important to use a development plan that's specific to experience-based learning. So that experience-based learning plan is a collaborative endeavor, and between the employee and the supervisor, rather than being dictated to them. So there should be space in the plan for learners to reflect on a specific activity, their general reactions, what skills they use, what they learned along the way, and including discoveries not just about themselves, but discoveries about the organization and what is going right and what some improvement, where room for improvement exists. And then also let's take a look at separate, this is kind of dovetails into this, separate on-the-job development, to separate on-the-job development from formal performance appraisal. I kind of mentioned that, but never evaluate the learner's job performance based on their success or failure in a learning assignment. Otherwise, it would be very difficult to take a learning orientation, because learning in and of itself opens up a high probability for some shortcomings and failures along the way, which are just as much learning experiences as wins and successes. Identify vital resources. So before you enter into a project like this, identify who the subject matter experts are, who are experienced mentors, what materials and equipment or other tools are needed to strengthen the opportunities for success. And those individuals, if they're individuals or equipment or whatever it is, should be set up before the stretch assignment begins. Lastly, ensure that everyone involved is clear on their role and their responsibilities. And this may have to be delineated very, very well if you have multiple individuals involved. To say, hey, so-and-so is an expert, go and tap into them if you need any help. And that individual may mistakenly think that they are now functionally supervising the individual when that is not your intent. That can be very confusing to both the employee as well as the person performing that expert role. So you need to be very clear about, for everyone who's involved, where their role begins and ends with that. And as a supervisor, you should be maintaining the supervision role. Okay, so that's before. Now, during the assignment, there are some probably obvious things to do. Provide regular check-ins. I put that there because these should be scheduled. They shouldn't be, oh, I'll just kind of drop in past your desk. That may be fine too, but you should provide regularly scheduled check-ins as well, so that there's a formal review of what is being learned and what the progress is, also to be able to pick up on any obstacles that might be presenting themselves in a stretch assignment. Provide behavior-specific feedback. The researchers DeRue and Wellman found that access to feedback plays a critical role in projects that succeed. Feedback is particularly important in development activity since actions and behaviors are being experimented with. The employee benefits from hearing which activities are landing and which ones are not, so they can adjust and do that promptly. The frequency of feedback should be balanced, not only delivered when there's a problem and not sugar-coated or avoidant when there are corrective adjustments needed. So that would be helpful. Third, provide small wins to build confidence. We talked before about the need to identify what parts of the assignment can be broken down into smaller parts. Well, experiences that are way too difficult may have a negative impact on learning and development. So the value of reducing the complex and lengthy assignments into bite-sized portions are presenting opportunities for victory. Provide opportunities for real-time, intentional reflection on the learning that is happening. You spend time to create a learning plan, but it's of little use if it's never revisited. So encouraging reflection on multiple dimensions is very helpful in crafting success. So these could be general reactions, particular skills that are used, emerging patterns, important discoveries, and so forth. Watch for hazards, finally. Watch for hazards and distress signals as they're emerging. So because the employee is under a certain amount of pressure to learn and grow, it shouldn't be to the point that they're going to, that they ultimately fail or have an emotional collapse over the assignment. Supporting assignees to successfully navigate through new challenges means that you need to pay attention to a change in behavior or performance that might indicate that they're stuck somewhere on the learning curve, and some adjustments might be needed. Okay, so then after this, after the assignment, there are a couple things, or 3 things here, that you can take a look at. Conduct a debriefing session for the project, the assignment. Review what was learned, what went well, what could be improved, and how learned skills can be transferred to other areas as well. Reflect on the learning process itself, either through one-on-one meetings, having the employee keep a learning journal, or using self-reflection forms that ask questions like, what did you discover? How is it relevant to your job? What are 3 things you did particularly well? How did you overcome the obstacles? How did you identify the obstacles? There are numerous questions that you can put in there to help guide a reflective learning process. And then finally, modify your future approaches. In addition to the employee learning, as a supervisor, you should also be learning from stretch assignments. It creates learning opportunities for the supervisor as well as the person who is stretching. The employee is likely to be able to share data and discoveries and specific wisdom that the supervisor can use to improve operations. It's also likely that they can share ways to improve the stretch assignment process itself. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about mitigating bias. There are a few strategies or practices to mitigate some hazards we discussed earlier, and there's no particular plan or conscientious purpose, if there is no particular plan or conscientious purpose for offering a stretch assignment or seeing or overseeing the results. It's just an assignment. These are the ones that can wax political bias and promote favoritism. So to counter this, organizations and supervisors can take a more conscientious approach. First, you need to ask yourself, what does high potential or high performing mean to you? All of us have preconceived notions of these labels. It will do us good to stop and examine those notions. Often there are a few telltale traits, maybe physical, maybe personality, that creep into our definitions. A source I consulted contrasts traits from behaviors, and I like this. Behaviors can be changed, traits are permanent. And that may not be true all across the board, but as we're talking about these in this context, let's think about that as the difference here. Behaviors change, traits are permanent. So for example, the idea that a tall gray-haired man with a commanding voice possesses the characteristics of a natural leader is based on traits rather than behavior or performance. So our personal biases toward physical or personality traits are laden with assumptions that are based on our limited experiences or our cultural conditioning. So we then interpret these behaviors that we see as fitting those biased assumptions, or we might go as far as imagining or thinking we observe behaviors that fit our perceptions of the traits. Physical features signal something to us, so there's certain dress or grooming patterns that do the same, and we create images for which individuals either fit or do not fit our definition of high potential, and that then gives us an errant impression that we have established good or objective criteria. So stepping back to challenge those assumptions is a worthy pursuit, and further, supervisors have to clearly define what they mean by high potential, and once again, check those definitions with errant assumptions. And this should be done long before ever selecting candidates. A few other things that we can do. Formalize stretch assignments. Document all aspects of the assignment. While keeping it informal can seem like it's less stressful or less consequential to the assignee, put their mind at ease, it can also feel ambiguous or worth less than the full effort. So sometimes informality precipitates from the pressure to get an assignment started fast as well. Sometimes the supervisor is stressed or tired. They don't want to create this all of the documentation and all the structure around the assignment. They just want to get it out fast and let's make something happen. But these are situations which are unhealthy, which unhealthy bias flourishes because we start relying on gut feelings, read biases, instead of carefully reasoned decisions. If you can't do it right, consider postponing the stretch assignment. Next, document and review who gets stretch assignments. Examine these patterns over time. It might be helpful to have reasonably objective peers review the patterns you don't see. For instance, do all the assignments go to a particular gender? Do all the assignments go to a particular work unit or a particular profession? That's something to consider as well. If your organization has a history of favoritism, and I'm sure you know if it does or not, you hear it, you hear about it, recognize that some individuals may view a stretch assignment as suspect, and especially when it might expose them to consequential risk. And employees might perceive that exposure risk to be even greater from their peers who now view them as favored, as from any consequence from an assignment flop. So a side note is if you're recognizing these patterns, it might be worth observing what patterns or actions have fostered this perception. Real or perceived, the perception becomes the reality for your future candidates for stretch assignments. So it might also be courageous to point those patterns out to colleagues and senior management with some suggestions for remedy. Don't overlook routine work. Stretch assignments seem to naturally flow from project-based work. It just seems to flow easier that way. So by default, employees whose jobs are project-based, they also tend to receive more stretch assignments than others. However, stretch assignments are equally valid for employees who perform routine functions. It might take a little more effort and creativity to identify and structure those assignments, but that can be done. Find the quiet talent. It's a tendency to more readily extend stretch assignments to individuals who are really good self-promoters or who are more comfortable requesting challenging assignments. While there's nothing wrong with this, it can result in a pattern of other talented personalities being overlooked or even pushed out by more ambitious peers. Some employees tend to round down their assessment of their own skills or their own readiness for a stretch assignment. And so sometimes a little encouragement is needed from your high performers who are frankly comfortable doing what they're doing very well. Supervisors also should be noting development goals for each employee. When you do this, it places the needs and opportunities for an employee in clearer sight. It's in plain sight. If you've been doing this, then the development goals will become a conversation between the employee and the supervisor, and you may find that an opportunity for a stretch assignment or an idea for stretch assignment just naturally emerges. So these development goals are also a great opportunity, a great time to share organizational needs with the employee and identify where those needs link up with employee needs or interests. It's not a matter of saying, well, what do you feel like doing, and let's find if you can do it. As a supervisor, you're sharing, these are the organizational needs. Where does that link up with where your interests are? And then you start to see ideas emerge for what could become a stretch assignment. Okay, so let's talk about mitigating risks for a large-scale stretch assignment program. So this would be if you're going to be conducting a stretch assignments as an orchestrated part of the way your agency or your work unit does employee development. In this case, there are a few things that are worth considering. One there at the top there is consider banking and posting opportunities. So they can be stretch assignments. If you're using them frequently, they can be perceived as a closely held and guarded or a plum assignment, very desirable. So to make stretch assignments transparent and searchable allows more individuals the chance to benefit from them. And it might be beneficial to post the open roles and stretch assignments through common agency communication channels. So some things you want to include if you're doing that are a description of exactly what the assignment is, the qualifications, that is minimum qualifications, and we're not talking about cutting out everyone on those qualifications. We're looking at, there might be some things that you just have to have as at a minimum to pursue a particular project. And then clear expectations for the assignment or role. And some of that can be fleshed out as the assignment is actually made, but you should have a pretty good idea for those that are being posted as opportunities. Okay, if numerous assignment possibilities flow in, there might need to be a system of logging and prioritizing these kinds of assignments as well. You can imagine if you begin to post opportunities and other people get ideas, before long you've got a dozen different stretch assignments, which could really stretch supervisors to their breaking point. If too many stretch assignments are going on at once, that's not a good thing either. Everyone's off doing something different than their normal performance expectations. Okay. You can standardize some aspects and some of the expectations, not of the particular project, but of what the stretch assignment encompasses. So for instance, there might be certain guidelines or protocol about how a stretch assignment unfolds or how you do it. And that would be a really based on the situation that you're in and the climate and culture of your organization or work unit. We talked about designating check-in points. Some organizations have found that designating specific times that an employee will check in with a mentor are documented. So for instance, when the project reaches this point, that's deemed the 10% into the project point, or 25% or 50%, or when we hit this point, everyone will have a meeting with a supervisor to kind of check in there. So those are some things that can be helpful as well. And then reporting and debriefing templates, oftentimes, especially with newer supervisors, and as well as experienced supervisors, that what to talk about when you check in. Okay, what are you learning? But that's rather general. It may be helpful to have some templates that help supervisors have the right questions to make sure that the organization itself is gleaning the information and for growth, for their own growth and development from the stretching employee. And then I love this one, skills inventory. So keeping an organizational skills inventory is great. As individuals complete assignments or as supervisors consider new assignments, a scan of skills and strengths and deficits within the organization might inform an appropriate future assignment. At one point, we were taking a look and saying, okay, how many people know this knowledge? Or how many people have demonstrated this skill? And those become great opportunities for development. If you look and you say, wow, we only really have one or two people who really know this liability aspect of what it is we do, that may highlight an area that your organization needs to grow in terms of its bench depth. So having a skills inventory, or who has completed what kind of stretch assignments, may allow you or may give you an opportunity to do a scan and say, wow, we have something new that we're pushing into. How many individuals do we have that can help us with that right now? And you may find that you're then capitalizing on the stretch assignments that you've already conducted. The third one is to provide public recognition for stretches. If you're going to orchestrate a large-scale stretch assignment program, certainly you want to promote it. And there's no better way than to promote it than to show or celebrate the yields from these types of assignments. What are the desirable results? Promote the successes in agency communication or other appropriate venues that you might have. And this creates a certain excitement and demand for such development by drawing attention to it. Our last point of the day is advice for those accepting or pursuing a stretch assignment. Advice for the stretchers. So most stretch assignments are not perfect. I've outlined a whole lot of things, and when it comes down to it, it seems that most stretch assignments are missing a point or two, and that doesn't make them unworthy of pursuing. Most stretch assignments aren't perfect. They may not meet all the ideals that we've discussed today, but if something is missing that's a genuine concern for you as a person being offered a stretch assignment, discuss this with your supervisor and offer suggestions. That's not demands, but suggestions for how this might be remedied. And also be sure you correctly understand whether this is a stretch assignment or whether it's a difficult performance objective. Be clear on that. If you choose to accept the challenge of a stretch assignment, then I have these 4 tips that come from Tara Frank. So in 2014, Tara Frank was Vice President of Consumer Platforms at Hallmark Cards. Her manager asked her to take on a stretch assignment in addition to her line management role. She shared 4 pieces of advice as a result of her experience. The first one was bring a beginner's mindset. Allow yourself to be new at it. We're asked to do something new, and many of us want everyone to believe that we know exactly what we're doing, that we're competent. Yet the desire to appear competent can undermine the necessary humility we need in order to experiment and discover what it takes to get there. Be inquisitive. Be as curious as you can possibly be, says Frank. She recommends speaking to a wide cross-section of those involved and asking managers why they felt it was important for you to devote time to this issue and what a successful execution of this assignment looks like to them. Over-deliver. Don't lose sight of the opportunity that's been entrusted to you. If you have been selected for a special assignment, it means someone took a risk on your behalf and put their reputation on the line to advocate for you. This person, along with your organization, is invested in your success and will be watching how you perform. When someone gives you the opportunity to stretch, don't just hit the status quo, says Frank. Give it your absolute all. And then finally, utilize the stretch assignment as a springboard. Frank says, I always look at stretch assignments as springboard opportunities. Use this moment to your fullest advantage. You can go on to do bigger and better things, meet more people, broaden your network, and expand your knowledge base. Take this opportunity to do amazing things with it. And with that, I think we are concluded for today. Before I exit, I do want to put in a plug for November 18th. Abraham Lincoln's Leadership Legacy will be our off-the-shelf offering on that date and at the same time, and you will be sent a registration link after this session closes. Abraham Lincoln's Leadership Legacy will be presented by Dr. Dan Chase, and who is an expert on Abraham Lincoln and his leadership legacy. All right.